We begin with this Fox News alert. We are awaiting two live events. It's been a very busy morning already. Remarks from Attorney General Merrick Garland and the White House press briefing after President Biden addressed the escalating political crisis surrounding his handling of classified documents. And now a second batch found at one of his two homes in Delaware. This is Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner. My co-host is here, Emily Campagno. Also with us, Jerry Willis, Leslie Marshall, and Bill Hemmer. Who? And Bret Baier? Yeah, it's going to be good. Okay, the big news today. White House counsel saying the second batch of classified materials were found in the garage storage space of the president's home in Wilmington, Delaware. Actually, one document was in a room adjacent to the garage. Just to keep up, the president says they were locked up next to his Corvette. He literally said that. His Corvette, when he was pressed by our own Peter Doocy, came up again.
Mr. President, classified material next to your Corvette. What were you thinking?
Let me, I'm going to get a chance to speak on all this, God willing, soon. But as I said earlier this week, people, and by the way, my Corvette's in a locked garage, okay? So it's not like you're sitting out in the street.
So
but at any rate,
was in a locked garage.
Yes, as well as my Corvette. But as I said earlier this week, people know I take classified documents and classified material seriously. I also said we're cooperating fully and completely with the Justice Department's review. As part of that process, my lawyers reviewed other places where documents in from my time as vice president were stored, and they finished the review last night. They discovered a small number of documents of classified markings in storage areas and file cabinets in my home and my personal library. This was done in the case of the Biden Penn. This was done in the case of the Biden Penn Center. The Department of Justice was immediately, as was done, the Department of Justice was immediately notified, and the lawyers arranged for the Department of Justice to take possession of the document. So we're going to see all this unfold.
Yeah, we are going to see it unfold. White House correspondent Peter Doocy with the newest unfolding developments. Peter.
And the counsel's office didn't say anything about the Corvette. The reason that I asked the question that way is because during COVID, the Biden campaign posted a video of him at his residence in Wilmington backing a Corvette, a 1968 Stingray, into a garage. So that's why I asked that, and that's when we learned something from the president that was not in the counsel's statement, which is that it is locked. They didn't have anything about it necessarily being secured in the garage. He says the documents and the car are safe behind a locked garage door. The counsel's office also said this. It was kind of vague. A small number of additional Obama-Biden administration records with classified markings were found in a storage space in the president's Wilmington, Delaware residence. While that's happening over on Capitol Hill, the questions that people who just got subpoena power have are pretty straightforward.
Why was it lawyers doing the moving from the first location? I mean, normally when we move something, you get your relatives together, you buy pizza, and you get a truck, and you move things. But no, they had lawyers in there packing boxes and looking at things.
So a key question now, when did President Biden find out about this second batch? Because in a carefully worded statement, he only copped earlier this week to knowing about one set of documents.
They found some documents in a box in a locked cabinet, or at least a closet. And as soon as they did, they realized there were several classified documents in that box. And they did what they should have.
Critics are claiming there is a double standard because when President Trump was involved in something similar but not identical, Biden spoke of the dangers of exposing sources and methods and of being irresponsible.
How could anyone be that irresponsible? Isn't that what this president says about mishandling classified documents?
The president spoke to this personally. He spoke to this personally. He believes that classified documents and information should be taken seriously.
White House officials continue to say that President Biden's personal lawyers did everything right once they realized that there were classified documents somewhere that they shouldn't be. But they are not telling us, at least not yet, how the documents got there in the first place. Harris.
Peter, great reporting as always. Thank you very much. Let's go to Washington, D.C. via satellite. We have Bret Baier. Bret, Talk to me, if you will, about what we saw with the Speaker of the House, because we know that Congress was going to look into potentially the first batch when that came about. But now there are multiple locations that NBC News is reporting that the staff are looking at. Biden team, attorneys.
Yeah, and I think with the changeover of the House, you're going to see a lot of questions and a lot of focus on this in various committees, and you wouldn't have obviously seen that with the Democratic control of the House. I think the best line of the morning came from Jonathan Turley, who said on the previous show, the Corvette standard doesn't actually appear in the Federal Register. So how these documents are locked in the garage and what happens with this is really key. And I think the biggest question that we don't know is why the president said his lawyers said don't ask about what the documents were. Why doesn't he want to know what the documents were? What are the documents? And you know, according to multiple reporting, there are classified markings that are pretty high on the classification chain. The actual Federal Registry says under the Espionage Act that it's gross mishandling of documents, and it doesn't matter how many. And we talked about this extensively in the Trump Mar-a-Lago documents, which numbered hundreds. But
we talked about it with Hillary Clinton
and
too.
The handling of that. That's right.
Yeah, we talked about it with Hillary Clinton. I realized she wasn't president, fancied herself that, but couldn't get there. But she had materials as well. I mean, this isn't the first time that we're seeing this. It isn't the first rodeo by any of these people, though, when you consider the Clintons and the Bidens, right? So it's hard to believe a man today stands up and says, everybody knows how serious I am about classified documents. But if you ask him about them, he's been told don't say anything.
And he's been told to read from exactly what the sheet says. Both times he's been asked about these documents, he read from the sheet that's on the podium. I think the biggest thing that we're going to see this afternoon is what happens with the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, and if they name a special counsel. Because there are a lot of people up on Capitol Hill and experts who look at this that say you can't name a special counsel in one and not name a special counsel in another. You're already investigating Hunter. Yeah. And you've already seen other lawmakers saying that as well. I think that'll be the big question this afternoon.
Congressman Comer, the new chairman of Oversight in the House now, was on with me as the news was breaking last hour with the president and so on and so forth and McCarthy. And he said, you know, he's not a big fan of special counsel in this situation because it becomes a political pick. He's not sure if he can trust it, especially based on the fact, Brett, what are your thoughts on how do we get the information that we were kept from having as a media, as a public, for 2 months? Like, we don't even know what we don't know.
No, we don't know what we don't know. And the fact that they were found on November 2nd, the fact that numerous Democratic campaigns used the Mar-a-Lago documents issue as a hammer on some Republican candidates in the midterm elections, we don't find out until January that this is all going on. That's another one of the big questions. When did the president specifically know that this was an issue? And was it beholden on the White House to come out and tell the public at that point?
All right, Brett, I know you're standing by with us. We're going to come out to the couch now. Emily, strict culpability was something that you talked about yesterday in terms of it doesn't matter what the president remembers or how he feels about certain things or none of that, what he intended, none of that. It's a strict culpability problem.
Right, strict liability, exactly. But you guys, there's nothing to see here. No, it's totally fine. It was behind a locked garage, right? Everything's fine. It was with a Corvette. It wasn't a Ford. The garage wasn't open, so everything's fine. What an absolute joke this president is. And then he's reading off his talking cards like that's going to help in court, buddy. I can't help but think that it is purely deceptive to put a bunch of classified documents in a folder marked personal, and interestingly mix them in with the most deeply personal of possessions, which is funeral arrangements for his son. And then a couple are behind the bike that he fell on and the Corvette. Oh, it's a Stingray, guys, not to worry, it's a Stingray. And then it's a locked garage. My neighbor's garage was locked too and their car was broken into. Somehow that is supposed to assuage the American people that not only does this president take his oath of office and the office itself seriously, but that he's actually protecting our national security. And here's the deepest question of all. We talked about a moment ago about Merrick Garland appointing the special counsel and whether something will happen here. But let's talk about the timeline of such. So on November 18th, Merrick Garland announced the appointment of Jack Smith as special counsel to investigate the Mar-a-Lago document case, right? The Biden documents were discovered, as we know, November 2nd, conveniently before midterms, so we didn't hear about it until just now. And as David Spunt points out, National Archives then notified the DOJ and Garland appointed U.S. Attorney John Lash. Well, we do not know when Garland was specifically notified of the Biden documents, but it would be surprising if Garland was not aware of the Biden documents when he announced the Trump special counsel.
So what does that mean?
It means that he likely knew, and yet again, we still are not hearing about this now. The special counsel appointment, if it happens, would be after public pressure, after all of this comes to light, after it's behind the stingray, guys, all is fine.
Yeah, and that's what Chairman of Oversight Comer was saying, why he wouldn't trust the special counsel being named by AG Garland. Although he says because it was done with Trump, he does think that out of fairness, it should be done now. Before we move on, I want to get to House Speaker Kevin McCarthy on the discovery of Biden's classified documents. Let's watch.
But I think Congress has to investigate this. Here's an individual that's been in office for more than 40 years. Here's an individual that sat on 60 Minutes that was so concerned about President Trump's documents locked in behind, and now we find it just as a vice president, keeping it for years out in the open in different locations. I do not think any American believes that justice should not be equal to all.
You don't represent every Democrat in the world, but I am curious to know what you, as someone on the left, thinks in this particular moment.
I don't? I thought I did. No. First of all, I believe in fairness, and I do believe a special counsel should be appointed. And as we know, a special counsel wasn't appointed the minute that documents at Mar-a-Lago were found, which Jonathan Turley needs to include because Corvettes and Mar-a-Lago aren't in there. I think a bigger problem here is the system when a president leaves office or a vice president leaves office to have documents, especially top secret documents, not leaving anywhere, ending up, whether it's Mar-a-Lago or a garage, first, in the best interest of the law, security of the American people. Second, I think there's a double standard here and hypocrisy on both sides. On my side, there's outrage, when, Donald Trump, these documents are found. But I'm hearing Republicans 24/7, almost ad nauseum, outraged about this now that it's President Biden who has the documents. I wasn't hearing that sentiment from these Republicans when it was Donald Trump. It's wrong either way. There are legal issues either way. And Comer, a Kentucky Republican, Congressman Comer was on your show earlier, he also said he doesn't think that Joe Biden did anything wrong. He's in print saying that just 2 days ago. So I think everyone knows that this was not malicious by former President Trump or current President Biden. The American people want to know, but the American people didn't elect these officials to go on and on and on. They have a divided government because they want the government to work together to get things done. And this is not number one on their hit parade.
The speed of news. Comer spoke 2 days ago. We didn't know what we know today. He's on with me and things are breaking. And his questions now go to there needs to be an investigation. And even he would capitulate that there needs to be a special counsel just to make it even with what they did with Trump.
I agree with that.
And at the same time, why weren't we told how much were the politics in play? I'm sure he would have so much more to say if another batch were found. And that brings me to the issue with you. Yeah. So NBC News says it has a source that's telling them that the Biden team, and I'm not saying the staff of the White House, but we don't know. We know at least a group of attorneys, potentially even the president himself, looking for other locations where classified documents might have found their way while he was vice president.
That was yesterday, right?
The report, yeah, but now we look at what we know now.
I think Emily really tapped into this. You've got a timeline.
But yes.
Now, right? Starting on November 2nd, they knew there were documents in this think tank, the Penn Biden Center on Capitol Hill. We didn't know about it until this week, right? So now on the 11th of January, yesterday, they find more documents at his home in Wilmington, Delaware. The statement it's got a clever line, and the attorneys can tell me if I'm on or off of this. But they said the president's lawyers have searched the president's Wilmington and Rehoboth Beach, Delaware residences. The other locations where files from his vice presidential office might have been shipped in the course of the 2017 transition. Might. Leaving open the possibility that there could be more out there. I think we're at the very beginning of the story. If Garland puts a lid on it at 1:15 today, a lot of the stuff may drop silent for some time because we may not get a lot of information going forward. On the 60 Minutes interview that you mentioned, it's a bad look. I mean, this was September. He laid out Trump. That was a bad look.
September 18th.
Alan Dershowitz last night on Hannity was arguing that we need a law that will help define what comes of former presidents who, or in this case, sitting presidents, when it comes to having classified material. Like, all that's in play right now, and we don't know where this goes. And I would add, there are so many. Carl was on with us this morning. In one whiteboard, Harris.
Oh, I watched it. That whiteboard was everywhere.
How'd they get there? Talking about the Penn Biden Center. Now we can say the Wilmington home as well. How did they get there? Did you use the docs in your memoir? Is there a connection between the Penn Biden Center and the $54 million that Penn received from China? Sorry, it was $54 million total from other countries, of which $14.5 million was from Chinese connections. Who and what are the sources of the Chinese money? Why won't the president look at the documents, which is something that was just mentioned a moment ago. Turley then told us this. It was ill-advised for him to go off script right there when Peter Doocy was answering the question, because he had the prepared statement that he read, not well, but that whole idea about it was in a locked garage with a Corvette. It's not like it was sitting out in the streets. Things like that lawyers do not like.
Well, and then McCarthy picks up because, you know, there's a staccato to the drum beat now. President speaks and then boom, 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 everybody comes. The House Speaker says they were just in the open. Well, now he can say that because the president said it was locked up next to his garage, which I've got windows in my garage, just like you had a family member or a friend. Somebody can break into your garage. Were they in the glove box? I mean, I feel like we should be asking, well, did the butler do it?
Well, now his team is saying, and we responded promptly and we're cooperating fully, as if that also assuages breaking the law. Again, going back to strict liability, it doesn't matter whether there was a malicious intent. The intent doesn't matter whatsoever. It's like after I murder someone and then I tell you, it's okay, guys, I cleaned up the mess. I cleaned up the blood. It's all good.
I shot you once, not 40 times.
Right. The murder still happened. And frankly, national security and any type of faith in this administration is what is being murdered right now.
Real quickly, as you were talking, I got to thinking, because I thought that Jonathan Turley op-ed in New York Post was so excellent.
From yesterday.
And and what he talked about was part of what he had said with you today at the end of your program this morning. He said, why is it that we don't know all the different places and all the different times those documents were moved between 2017 and now? So we know that some went to the Penn Biden Center. We know that some went to his house, potentially other locations, but we don't know how many times they were moved. Now, and I'm going to ask my team, are you sending this for me to put on the record? Okay, all right. We cannot independently confirm this at Fox. The FBI reportedly, from other sources, but not Fox News yet, we're working on it. The FBI has interviewed multiple Biden aides. Well, you would think that, because whoever came into contact with this, and how long have they been talking to people?
We're getting no answers at all. I mean, that's the real problem here. Look, I'm a reporter. I have questions. I want people to do their job and step up and start telling the American people what's going on. Whether it's the press person for Biden, she doesn't want to talk. In fact, she's telling reporters that they can't ask questions. The president is saying, you know, look, I'm doing what my attorney's telling me to do, so I'm not looking at any documents. At the end of the day, somebody needs to step up. It's like quiet quitting has gone to the White House now. Nobody wants to do their job.
You know, there's a chain of custody that we have in criminal law, right, of evidence. And if a piece of evidence is not categorically, specifically, precisely, and accurately recorded every step of the way, where that piece of evidence has been, who has been in contact with it, well, it's thrown out. Entire verdicts are vacated. Entire cases are nullified because of a piece of evidence has somehow lost its way. If we cannot account for a moment where its presence has been. Here, too, I draw that analogy as to your point. Were they in a U-Haul? Was it driving from the garage to, oh, and we made a stop at In-N-Out, and then we made a stop here, but it ended classified, it ended in a locked garage. The mockery that this administration has made of those documents, we're focusing on 2017 to 2020. Well, what happened before? What happened during? And this is merely the tip of the iceberg, because if we're starting to find it amongst his, you know, badminton sets and everything else in the garage, I wonder what else we can look forward to learning about.
David Asman asked me a question at the very end of Faulkner Focus. I made just 5 seconds for him because he was burning to ask it. And it was tongue-in-cheek, but he was serious. Did Hunter Biden have a key to the garage?
Oh, gosh.
Because of the nature of the foreign intelligence that we do know about among the classified documents in the first batch that were found at Penn Biden Center, being or having a mention of Iran, Ukraine, China, because of that, then the questions about Hunter Biden's business dealings with particularly two of those countries come into play. Bret Baier, your thoughts?
I think it's a good question. I think you have Hunter Biden under investigation, and part of that investigation deals with his influence peddling, and obviously all those things are tied. And yes, he at one time lived at that home and was in and out of that home. So all of those things are legitimate questions. The bigger issue here is the politics of this moment. And for anybody who looks at this and says, listen, this is different. Yes, there are differences, big differences. And you can't say that either one of these things, the Mar-a-Lago documents or the documents at the home or the Penn Center, are good or okay. Neither are. The mishandling of classified information is a serious, serious thing. And but you also can't say that you can't discount the Biden handling. And I think that we're going to see the Attorney General not do that. And if he follows what many experts are saying he needs to do, is to appoint another special counsel.
Real quickly, Bret, there in the nation's capital and us in New York, we're not getting all the details that you might be. We still don't know exactly what Merrick Garland's going to talk about. It could, in fact, be about the Trump investigation. It could, in fact, be about what we're learning about Biden. But no doubt he'll be asked about Biden. Your last word before we go to break.
Right. I think it has to deal with this as it's developing. You're right. We don't know specifically from the Justice Department, but it is gathering steam here. It is a big, big story, and it cannot be put under the table. This is something that every network's going to have to cover, and the contrast in the political moment is really telling.
Bret, thank you. Before we go to break.
Just to add, yeah, Bret touched on the politics there. He's exactly right about that. This president was getting ready to launch a second campaign. Remember all the considerations over Thanksgiving and Christmas? We're going to give it some thought.
Yeah.
Early in the fall, there were numerous articles that were written about the fact that if he did decide to run, he would be 82 years old beginning a second term. That was a signal, I believe, within the Democratic establishment that they did not want him to run for a second term. Well, he's getting ready to gear up yet again. I don't know what this does to that campaign, but the politics definitely must be considered.
So you and I know, because we've done this a really long time, sometimes you let things out while you can still control them. And look at all of the political capital that he built up in just the last few days. Several appearances around January 6th. And what happened on January 6th is separate from the politics of the moment for the President of the United States. So I don't even want to wade into what was going on. I'm talking about what was going on in 2023 on January 6th. And the politics of the moment, and him being presidential in those moments, going to the U.S. border with Mexico and picking up those political chits along the way. And then suddenly this starts to drip, drip, drip. Is it possible that it isn't just, oh, accidentally we decided to make it now?
Who stands to benefit from the leak is the question you always ask. Who stands to benefit right now from this? Some might argue, many people in his own party who are done with him.
I would disagree. I would say the Republicans came into power in the House, and all of a sudden, more batches of documents are found. I don't have a grassy knoll. I am definitely not a conspiracy theorist, but there's a lot of them out there right now tweeting about
Republicans certainly couldn't get into where the Corvette was. So this is on Biden and his side. All right, coming up.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.